Hi everyone, this is Holly. I thought I would show you how I created a spring-themed pastel-colored soap using clays and scented with one of my favorite essential oil blends for spring and summer. You'll find all the links and information listed below, and if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll show you the recipe listed in a soap calculator. Before I get started, I wanted to take a second and emphasize the importance of learning and following lye-safe handling procedures when making cold processed soap. Always be sure to cover any exposed skin and wear eye protection during the entire soap making process, even when cleaning up. If you need more information, you'll find links below to posts and videos about lye safety and beginner soap making. The two clays I chose for this soap were French green clay and rose kaolin clay. I hydrated them with just enough water to be fluid so they would be easier to blend into the soap later, and also help reduce the chance of having specks of clay in the finished soap. I also prepared some indigo root powder and sunflower oil. I like to add a little blue to the green clay because it helps turn the yellowish green color into a much prettier green. I only blended the oils and lye a short amount of time, just well enough that I could divide them into 2 equal parts. At this point, I wasn't ready for the soap to reach emulsion or trace. As you'll see in just a bit, I needed time for the first half of the batch to set up before moving on to the rest. If I had initially blended the entire batch to emulsion, the second half would have likely set up before I was ready to pour. I wanted both sides of the diagonal design to be as even as possible, so I chose to use a scale for dividing the batch. I weighed the entire batch, then subtracted the bowl weight to get the total weight of the soap, then just divided that number by 2. In case you're wondering why I placed a spoon in the bowl, I almost always pour onto a spoon or the blender shaft because it slows the fluid down and helps reduce turbulence at the surface, which can cause a lot of tiny air bubbles to be introduced into the oils. To create the pink soap, I only needed a little of the hydrated rose clay, about 1/4 teaspoon per cup of soap. It doesn't take a lot of this clay to create a pastel pink, so I like to add it in small increments, stir to check the color, then add more if needed. I wanted this soap at a very thin trace, so when I finished pouring it into the mold, the surface would be completely smooth and flat. When it's at a thinner trace, the soap won't sit on top of itself and helps create a straight, clean line between the layers. To help hold the mold at an angle, I used the soap mold angler from Custom Craft Tools. This tool was gifted to me in exchange for a review that I did in a previous video. I'll be sure to list that review below in case you're interested. You'll notice as I pour the soap that I adjusted the angle of the mold as I went. I was making sure the soap formed a perfect diagonal line in the mold. had to be very careful not to tip the mold too far, and I also tightened the screws on the mold angler arm so it would hold the mold securely until I could get the stops in place. When I was satisfied with the angle, I covered the soap, let it sit for about 30 minutes, and then started the green soap. I used about 1 teaspoon of the hydrated clay per cup of soap and then added some indigo oil. I used my mini mixer at first, then switched to my larger hand blender to hurry things along. I oven processed this soap as I normally do to make sure it went through gel phase, which helps the natural clay colors look more vibrant. I preheated my oven to its lowest temperature, turned the oven off, then placed the soap inside. I left the oven light on for about 4 hours, then turned it off as well. The next day I removed the soap from the oven and left it on the counter to sit for another 24 hours. I didn't know this at the time, but the lid had actually lifted away from the mold, exposing the soap to air, which, as you can see, caused a lot of ash to form on top. I would normally just use a steamer on the ash, but since I wanted the bars to be perfectly rectangular anyway, I just used a planer instead. Since this was a cold processed soap recipe, I made sure the type of lye was set to sodium hydroxide, or NaOH. My recipe oil weight was 1100 grams. My lye concentration was 35%, which means my lye solution contained 35% sodium hydroxide and 65% water. If you'd rather not use that much of a water discount, you can set this to 33% or 31%. And as always, I'll provide links below if you need more information on water discounts and lye concentrations. I left my superfat at 5% and set my fragrance to 40 grams per kilogram, which is a 4% usage rate or 4% of my total oil weight. This recipe is made up of 49% liquid oils and 51% solid oils and does contain lard. If you'd rather not use lard, I recommend replacing it with 20% shea butter and 3% more cocoa butter. Once you have all your numbers entered, you simply calculate the recipe, then select View or Print to see a complete listing along with the amount of sodium hydroxide required to saponify your oils. Thank you so much for watching, and if there's a soap or technique you'd like me to do in the future, just let me know in the comments below.